Welcome to my predictions for 2018, 2019 and 2020. I actually prepared this vlog quite a while ago, back in July, but I haven't had time to crack on with it. So let's jump right into it. So something is happening in 2020. It's bigger than Brexit. It's bigger than Trump. It's the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Capricorn. So you may be asking, why are we talking about that if it's only going to be happening in 2020? Well, often with these major planetary cycles, you start seeing the effects of them 2 years before, especially with the Saturn-Pluto one. So why is this significant? Well, Saturn moves rather slowly. It goes through the whole zodiac in about 29 years. Pluto, even slower, it takes 248 years to go through. And the pair of them make a conjunction every about 33 to 38 years. So although Saturn-Pluto conjunctions happen at regular intervals over these sort of 30 to 40 year periods, we haven't had a Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Capricorn for over 500 years. And what's more, in 2020 we'll also be having a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius, and that hasn't happened in over 600 years. So I'm going to be looking at the symbolism of what Saturn-Pluto conjunctions mean in general, and what it can possibly mean that this conjunction is happening in Capricorn. So there are a couple of things we look out for Saturn-Pluto conjunctions. One of them is the establishment of new countries. The second one is natural resources. And the third one is, because both of them are about power and control, we see changes in the power structure. So it's a very political kind of conjunction. Also, what's interesting about this Saturn-Pluto conjunction is it's happening very close to the Neptune-Uranus conjunction that happened in 1993, very influential in the EU chart, and that happened at 18 degrees of Capricorn. This one's happening at 22 degrees of Capricorn. It'll be quite powerful, happens on the 12th of January 2020, and it's lining up with quite a few other planets, including Ceres, which is like an asteroid. So let's look back. The first Saturn-Capricorn conjunction of the last century was in Cancer in 1914. So, of course, the war was happening. It was the end of the Ottoman Empire. And when you look at the map of the Middle East, you see all these straight lines, almost as if it's been drawn by a ruler. Those are the Sykes-Picot lines that were drawn by the Frenchmen and the Englishmen when they divided up the whole of the Middle East of what was the Ottoman Empire to create all these new countries. In some cases, they're not really new countries. They're like Syria. They're ancient countries, but the boundaries were new for Iraq and all these. So there you see again the establishment of all these kind of new countries. What else was significant is that sort of 1914 period marked the end of the British Empire. It was really in decline, and the American Empire was on the rise. So what do you see? Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Cancer, and the new world superpower is a Cancerian country, America. So roll on to 1948, and we have a Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Leo. Very interesting, 1948, which new countries? North and South Korea are established. The partition between India and Pakistan, also the state of Israel. So again, you see the themes of the new countries. What's quite interesting now is that those are the very countries like North and South Korea, and also India and Pakistan, where there's a lot of problems, a lot of tensions, things just on boiling point, getting ready to explode. And that's why I think, because these countries are so strongly linked to the Saturn-Pluto cycle, we have to watch them very carefully, because as Saturn-Pluto conjuncts again, events in those countries will reach a pressure point, a boiling point, and the course of the history of those countries can potentially change. Something else that's interesting about 1948. The Saturn-Pluto conjunction was in Leo. So what superpower that as a Leo was born then? Well, I'd say it was the European Union, because although the European Union is a Scorpio, it has Leo rising. And I think the seeds for the EU, what has become the EU, were definitely sown in those post-war period. So if you have a look, there's something that circulated called the Madrid Circular in the early 50s, and it makes this point very clearly. And it says that in 1950, the German Geopolitical Center in Madrid outlined a manifesto. It was called The Third Way, a plan to coalesce with ideology of similar groups. It was a corporo-fascist elite. Now, what's really interesting about that statement is, in 2003, Tony Blair used these exact words. He talked about a new elite and the third way. And I think he was alluding to the whole thing that this EU has become, which is very definitely corporo-fascist. It's like a crony capitalism taken to a more mendacious and a more pervasive level. What this Madrid Circular also said was, the future is not democracy, but a system of statecraft similar to that of the Soviet dictatorship, which would enable the political and military elite in Europe to organize the industrial capacity of Europe. And then it goes on to talk about military and that sort of thing. So you can see there what was really the essence of what the EU actually is, as opposed to this trading bloc that it was sold to us. And there you go. So there, Saturn-Pluto conjunction, and you see very clearly the seeds of the EU being sown. So what else happened in 1948? Well, you'll remember in my discussion last year about Italy, modern Italy is born in 1946, so sort of 2 years before, and we see that Italy is moving to quite momentous events, as this year they've got elections coming up, and it looks like Five Star will either win outright or in coalition with Labour Nord, and both those are Eurosceptic and likely to pull Italy out of the Euro. So again, big events for Italy, who's tied to this Saturn-Pluto conjunction. So we hop along to 1982, and we have the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Libra. So Libra is the sign of marriage, and when I think of 1982, well, the year before, 1981, was the marriage to end all marriages. I don't think there will ever be a marriage as we saw with Charles and Di, and I think that was kind of indicative of Pluto in Saturn in Libra. But more importantly, Prince Charles was born in 1948, so he was born at the time of that Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Leo. He has Leo rising, even though he's all Scorpio. He gets married just after the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Libra, and I think he's going to be on the throne before the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Capricorn, probably in 2019. So that is something else to look out for. Now, I talked about the Saturn-Pluto conjunction we have now, happening very close to that whole Neptune-Uranus one we had. And I see this as similar to the right-wing pushback, because you look at 1982, we had Thatcher, we had Reagan, we had a pushback against the kind of socialist policies that had gone before. And so many times people compare Trump to Reagan, and they liken the two situations to this whole right-wing pushback. And very similar, we have Brexit, which is also a kind of nationalistic pushback. So I think that again relates to what was going on in 1982. Now, which Libran country that became a superpower was born around this time? Well, Henry Kissinger and George Herbert Walker Bush, that's the older Bush, they went over to China in 1979, and there were important talks about bringing China into the world community in terms of trade. And it was at that time when China introduced the one-child policy. And those two events around there are crucial to the fact that China, which is a Libra country, grew to be a world superpower, and the seeds were sown around about then. Okay, is there anything? Oh yes, another important thing about countries born right then that we see linking up to today. It was in 1980 that Mugabe took power in Zimbabwe, representing a great shift for that country. And now, in the run-up to 2020, we see that he's gone. Things might not have changed yet, but when you get rid of the head of the snake, you know, the second dictator never really has the same impetus as the first. So, great opportunity for change for Zimbabwe, because they are tied to the Saturn-Pluto cycle, as is Iran. The Shah was deposed, and Ayatollah Khomeini came in 1979. And there were great changes in Iran, sort of setting up this whole theocracy, the Islamic rule between the years of 79 and 82 when this transit happened. And now again we see the power of Saturn-Pluto conjunction bringing the possibility of change and new freedom to Iran. So now we move on, and we have the Saturn-Pluto conjunction that's happening in Capricorn, and we ask ourselves, I wonder which Capricorn country is set to become a new superpower. Well, the UK, of course, is Capricorn, but I think it's probably not going to be the UK, or that would be nice for everyone living here. I think this is going to be India, which is a Capricorn country. Could India be the first space power, the first country to discover water on the moon? It's out there, it's possible. This represents the rise of India as a power. Also very important, because as we talk back in 1948, the partition of India and Pakistan was during that Saturn-Pluto conjunction. So I think this bodes for India really taking off as a power. What about the establishment of other new states? Well, there's the first one, possibly, is Kurdistan, We know things are still very unsettled in Syria and Iraq. There's been a lot of turmoil. The international community and the powers that be are still heavily involved. Highly likely they might want to partition part of Syria and Iraq to create Kurdistan. Of course, Turkey are not going to be very happy about that, and I do see indications in Turkey's chart of possible aggression and conflict could be surrounding that. So look out for the establishment of Kurdistan as a state. Of course, we also have the kind of Catalonia thing, and I believe in Italy and Umbria and Lazio, there's also independence drives, as well as Bavaria in Germany. So all over Europe, instead of people sort of coming together as the European Union would want, we have these kind of states wanting to break away, and that is a lot to do with self-determination and the feelings of nationalism, pride, of people wanting to take their fate into their own hands, represented by Saturn Pluto. And okay, let's see, I've got quite a few things to talk about it. Establishment of resources. Okay, right, I think it's important now to move on to the next thing. Everyone knows that Capricorn is connected with international banking systems and finance. And therefore, this transit through Capricorn means there's going to be some sort of shake-up in the international money order. What's also interesting is this year we have Uranus moving into Taurus, where it'll stay for 7 years. Now, Taurus is the sign of money, of gold, of kind of commodities. So now we've got the planet of change, Uranus, in Taurus, the house of sign of money, and Pluto, Saturn conjunction Capricorn, which rules the banking institutions. So we've got to look out for this, meaning lots of change to do with money. Okay, I guess the most obvious thing is saying it'll be the end of hard cash, and we'll go away from a cashless society. Okay, that's kind of obvious. The other thing we could talk about is Bitcoin. Is this going to be a whole revolution that's going to change the way we work with money? Because that could literally bring countries down and cause a rise and fall and whole new millionaires and new power structures created around Bitcoin. So that's something. Now, last year, there was a BRICS conference in Vladivostok towards the end of the year, and they announced that they were going to establish a new currency. China is going to. It's going to establish a new cryptocurrency and also a new currency backed by gold. Both of these are aimed at destabilizing the dollar and creating a whole new financial sort of fiat currency not based around the dollar. So that is quite interesting. It was even suggested that London may be the epicenter for this whole new currency, which would put us at odds for the first time against America, which could be. What I'm interested about in this is the gold-backed currency side of it, because we know that when Colonel Gaddafi started, he implemented this gold dinar, which was a gold-backed currency to be used throughout Africa. Well, the next thing wasn't too long before, we had the conflict in India, and he was in Libya, and he was gone. We know that when Saddam Hussein wanted to trade oil in euros instead of the dollar, he was gone. America is very invested in maintaining the dollar as the world's reserve currency, because otherwise all the inflation that they've exported over the years by having this dollar as the main unit of exchange will be imported back, and it'll implode their economy. So anytime any country wants to set up any system that challenges the dollar, it leads to international conflict. And I think that's been seen quite clearly, and if you want to read more about it, Mike Rivero did an excellent sort of podcast called All Wars Are Bankers' Wars. Now, the interesting thing while we're talking about this whole change in the way we use money and what it could possibly mean, what new currencies could be like, and how it changes the balance of power geopolitically, in 1936, that was the last time when Uranus moved into Taurus. Hitler was the Chancellor. He was in charge of the money in Germany. Now, the Weimar Republic had astronomical inflation. Germany was a mess. It was great poverty, massive, inflation. The money was worth nothing. What did Hitler do to revive the economy, and why was he Time magazine in sort of 1938 and 1939? It was because he bypassed the private reserve banks, and he started introducing labor treasury certificates, which were effectively bills of exchange, which was the treasury printing their own debt-free currency. And this is what led to the German economy just taking off. It was a miracle. It was called Hitler's economic miracle, because it absolutely transformed the economy. What's really important about this is it's been tried before. Now, we know all these private central banks. It's not often talked about in the mainstream media. but they issue all currency with debt attached, producing more debt than money that can ever pay that debt. And it enslaves us and just creates this burden of debt, which is really a Ponzi scheme. And Abraham Lincoln recognized it, and when he needed money to fight the Civil War, he went to the Rothschilds bankers in London, and they refused to lend him money. So he simply started issuing money via the greenback, and using similar kind of thinking of bypassing the private reserves bank and issuing a debt-free currency. And we all know what happened to Abraham Lincoln. And I do believe that JFK had a bill called Bill 111100. I think that was the number of his, it was an executive order, and it was also to establish a specific currency not tied to the central banks, and he was assassinated. So it's always dangerous when countries pursue these routes, and I believe Iran is one of the countries, and some people said Syria is as well, but I wasn't able to obtain verification of that. But Iran also wanted to kind of use that route and do a pushback on these private central banks. So if everyone got in the spirit of that, and loads of countries started doing that, I think it would be great for the alleviation of poverty in the economies of countries in everywhere across the world. And perhaps we might just be able to see that happening with this conjunction. Hopefully it's powerful to create such a new wave of thinking in that. Okay, so what are we looking at now? So now, just to summarize, what have we got there? We've got Pluto-Saturn conjunction, so we're looking for big changes in world banking. We're also looking for new countries being established, possibly countries breaking up, and a great resurgence in self-determination. We're looking at this whole pushback against the kind of socialism, communism, authoritarian regimes with people wanting to make power more localized that's happening there. And possibly the discovery of new resources. Now, I do know the Chinese almost recolonizing southern Africa, all over Namibia, and also in Zimbabwe. There are villages with Chinese infrastructure or Chinese architecture springing up everywhere because the Chinese are in there, a lot of mining going on, so possibly a lot more mineral exploration going on in southern Africa. So before I end this, I was talking about the establishment of countries and superpowers being linked to this Saturn-Pluto cycle. So back in 1881, there was a Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Gemini, and shortly before that, there'd been a Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Taurus. So what country, what superpower was born then? Well, it happens to be South Africa. Gold was discovered in 1886, and Johannesburg was founded on that just a few years later. And just a few years earlier than this Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Gemini, diamonds had been discovered in Kimberley. Now, South Africa was formed as a republic on the 31st of May 1961, which is where it gets its kudos as a Gemini. But South Africa was discovered in April 1652, which makes it also a Taurus. So the fact that there was the conjunction in Taurus and Gemini kind of ticks both boxes for South Africa. So a lot of people might think, oh, South Africa, superpower, really? Well, in the 70s, the rand was worth $2. South Africa produced more water throughout than the whole of Africa combined. First heart transplant, first surrogate grandmother. At one stage, it had the world's most professional Air Force. Even recently as last year, it was voted the best accounting standards for listed companies in the world. So in books, you know, you had Random House in the beginning of the books. It used to say New York, London, Johannesburg. It was such a happening place. The hugest shopping centre, still the biggest hospital in the world, Baragwanath. So South Africa certainly did storm the stage as a result of these diamond and gold that was discovered, and a whole city, a whole vibrant, incredible city, Johannesburg, was built on that. So I think that once again illustrates quite nicely the power of these Saturn-Pluto conjunctions to bring countries to the fore. So we'll definitely look out for India taking the world by storm. I'm going to be doing in a few weeks' time, or when I have time, I'm going to be doing a vlog on the starts of religions, and we're looking back at the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Pisces related to the birth of Islam, and in Virgo related to the birth of Christianity. So these whole planetary cycles do have a lot to tell us, and it's quite exciting. So I'm splitting this into two because it's rather long, and in the next part of my discussion I just want to be a little bit more specific, and I am going to be talking about predictions based on this very interesting cover. I'll just put there for you. that appeared on The Economist. You can see that was in 2017. I think they've used tarot cards as a way of depicting their predictions for what's coming up in the next few years. And although this was for 2017, these remain incredibly relevant to my predictions, and I'm going to plug astrology into what they've depicted here as tarot cards for some more rather interesting predictions. So I hope you'll carry on and see the other side of this.